Hey listeners, it's Tim. Do you sometimes struggle with students who don't practice? This is by far the biggest and most frustrating challenge facing teachers around the world, and so I thought it's time we do something about it. On Monday, the 9th of December, we'll be hosting a special online Christmas event with the amazing Samantha Coates, who'll be helping us understand the role of parents in a successful practice routine. I saw this presentation at the APPC conference in Melbourne in July, and it was amazing, so I just had to ask if she'd be kind enough to share it with all of you, and she said yes. So it's on Monday, the 9th of December at 11 a.m. Melbourne time. If you're in the United States, that's Sunday, the 8th of December, around 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. We've got a whole lot of bonuses and giveaways to share with you, but you need to be live to access them. Grab your free ticket right now at topmusic.co/Sam. This episode of the Topcast is proudly supported by the ABRSM. You're listening to the Topcast, the original podcast for growth-minded instrumental music and voice teachers since 2015, with your host, Tim Topham. Our mission at Top Music is to empower instrumental music and voice teachers to find and nurture their innate creativity so that they can teach lessons that are innovative, integrated, and inspiring, and that will have a positive, lifelong impact on their students. Join us each week as we interview teachers and creators from around the world and unpack fun and exciting ideas to maximize your teaching and studio business success. Hey teachers, welcome back to the Topcast. Great to be spending some time with you again today. It's an episode, whether you're new here or a veteran listener, I really appreciate you spending some time with me today, and I hope you enjoy the episode. I've always been interested in other organizations, publishers, and composers who are aligned with our own top music pillars of teaching and our strong beliefs in the importance of creativity, singing, and movement in beginner music lessons. In fact, in pretty much all music lessons. It's why it was really fun to unpack Meredy Winters' method in episode 375. And a host with Paul Myatt, the Whole Body Learning course, which we did here in August. And by the way, the videos for that course are now available inside our Top Music Pro Academy. So any members who are interested in that or want to either revise it if they were a part of it or want to join it because they missed out, then that is now available for all our members. I'm very, very excited. And thank you to Paul and Gillian from Piano Teaching Success for sharing that with us. And of course, if you aren't yet a member, then head over to topmusicpro.com to grab your membership and jump into that course. It's a fantastic one. Anyway, there have probably been at least 30 episodes over the last 10 or so years of the podcast where I've interviewed and shared resources from other creators who are aligned with this modern teaching approach. Now, it's really, really interesting because just a few weeks ago, I realized that there were people doing exactly this approach using Kodály and Orff and Suzuki and singing and movement way back in the 1980s. Of course, if you missed that episode where Beck and I unpack the video of her having a piano lesson with an amazing teacher back in 1984, then go back and listen to that, or you can watch it on YouTube. But it just goes to show that, a lot of these ideas that we're now really encouraging teachers to get involved with and explore with their students have been around for some time. It's just a matter of being able to integrate it into the lessons and the format that you already have and that really work for you and the resources that you already use. So if you enjoy the no-book beginners approach for absolute beginner students, then what we're going to be talking about today with Mark Gibson, who's the founding director of Encore, there are resources there that will take some of these same ideas and continue it into a method book and then into more music reading, just as a lot of the resources from Paul Myatt at Piano Teaching Success and the Whole Body Learning course does as well. There are lots of options now, which is fantastic, right, for teachers who want to get more creative and want to involve more singing and movement in their lessons. There are lots of different ways that you can take your lessons and lots of resources available for teachers. So that's why I'm really happy to share all these other people who are creating amazing things, because I know that every student is different and every studio is different and every teacher is different. And we all want to approach things slightly differently that really suits us. And so while Music Moves for Piano might suit some people, while Piano Safari might suit other people, Encore might suit people, Whole Body Learning might suit people, it really just depends. And so if you're not quite feeling whether one of those fits you perfectly, then just keep your eyes and ears open, because there are so many great things out there, and I'm happy to be sharing one of those today. My guest today, Mark Gibson, is the founding director of Encore Music Education and Accent Publishing. He's the author of over 30 music publications, including Encore on the Keys, Theory Whiz, Encore on Strings, and Kinderbeat. His captivating compositions are featured in several exam syllabi, and Mark travels nationally and internationally as an examiner, adjudicator, masterclass teacher, and workshop presenter. His teaching expertise extends from early childhood and group lessons through to university and high-end diplomas. And when he's not on the golf course, Mark's passion is sharing his expertise with other students, with other teachers, and fostering imagination and excellence in all things musical. Mark, welcome to the show. It's great to meet you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Tim, and it's great to see you again.
Yeah, actually, I didn't. This isn't our first meeting because we did actually meet in person many years ago. This was way back before I'd really started my podcast or blog. It was about 10 to 15 years ago at a Bernie's Musicland event that we actually met. Do you remember it?
I think you're absolutely spot on, and I think you have got the timeline correct. And I was, yes, I'm going into the recesses of my memory now, and it's all coming back to me. Yes, famous Bernie's Musicland. Of course, so much has happened in the world since then.
Oh no, isn't it? It feels like yesterday in some ways, and it feels like a lifetime ago in others. But look, I was actually reminded about you more recently when one of our top music team members just couldn't stop talking. She was so excited. She'd purchased a whole bundle of your resources, and they were being delivered to her house, and she was talking about them. And I jumped on your website, and I thought, I really should get Mark on the show because we do actually cross over in so many of our approaches and thoughts about music education. So I'd love to learn about the origin of Encore Music Education. How did you come to be sharing piano teaching methods and compositions with teachers?
Well, you went back to Bernie's Musicland. What was that, 10 or 15 years ago? I think I'll go back several decades to start the answer to this question. I think some of it started actually when I was in secondary school. I quit formal piano lessons for a while. My father had bought an electronic organ, and I started improvising on the organ. It's got a pedal board, so I started discovering all these bass lines. I had a right hand there that was, going crazy with improvisation. Then I realised I had a left hand that was free to explore all these different harmonies. And over that 1 or 2 year period, I've got to say, I learned so much about improvisation and getting inside the music. I was playing for a number of functions. I played at a school show band, playing keyboard. So I had a very wide musical experience outside of regular lessons. I did go back for regular lessons. That was a big, important part of it. So that sort of opened up a lot of ideas for me. And then when I started studying music at the Queensland Conservatorium of Music, there was a lecturer there by the name of Una Morgan. And Una's teacher learned from Clara Schumann. In fact, Una said that sometimes Brahms would sit in on her teacher's lessons.
Oh, wow.
But it was in one of Una's, it's a good connection. Unfortunately, Una's not with us anymore. And you'd like to go back and revisit those days so you could ask more questions and gain more knowledge. But it was something Una said in a lecture. And she used these words. She said, but how would you teach it? And I thought, that's a funny question. I thought teachers just pointed to the page and pointed to those symbols on the page. And as students, we just played. And then when you got to the end of a particular section, the teacher would write the date on the score. And I thought, what's this about? How would you teach it? So that was the first time I really started thinking that there's a difference between reading from a page and actually teaching music. So I think that sort of set up a lot of groundwork for me.
Really interesting. I also love the fact that you had an experience with organ. It really amazes me the number of piano teachers out there whose experience through worship or accompanying church services or playing the organ has enabled them to become more fluent, better readers, better sight readers, ability to play lead sheets, all of these things that we know are really important. But sadly, kids these days, there's not that opportunity. I learned organ when I was 11 or something, and I used to the same. I had a godmother with an organ like the one you were talking about, 2 manuals, lots of buttons, the pedal board, and right. I used to love it. I wonder how, would you say the same, that this isn't really something that kids do anymore? It's something that is really in the history books, sadly. And therefore, this is why we need resources like Encore to create opportunities for this to happen more naturally in lessons.
I think you're absolutely right, because remember when the organ age came about, we were all just fascinated by these instruments, all the different sounds, how you could sound so fantastic. And I think you're right. And it's only when I've spoken to a lot of colleagues over the last few years, I realised that a lot of them had this organ experience as well. And you spoke about worship music. One of my favourite things was sort of sight reading on the spot, in a church situation. I used to love transposing hymns. That was my favourite trick. So, for example, if a hymn was in C major, I'd play the first verse in C flat, I'd play the second verse in C, and the third verse in C sharp. And I thought that was rather cool, you see. And then you talk about reading lead sheets and chords and things. So sometimes I used to change a lot of the harmony, put in new bass lines and things like that. So, yeah, it was just a wonderful experience.
And so now you've been able to combine all of that experience and your own teaching into what Encore provides for teachers, which is some really structured resources in how to go about not just teaching the reading that's on the page, because we all know that that is only a very small part of a music education, but trying to bring in all these other elements too. So why don't you tell us what do you provide for teachers at Encore?
Well, we provide a lot of resources for teachers. So, one of the things we have is our app, our Encore Music Quiz app. And that's how we deliver all the backing tracks. And the backing tracks and recordings are such a big part because that is where the true music is. So you referred to music on a page. So I always call that a score. And I think it's important to realise that it is a music score. Sometimes we leave off the word music and just call it a score. So, yeah, look, we provide recordings and backing tracks. They come through our app, Encore Music Quiz. That means that when you play along with the app, you're going to have terrific rhythm. You'll always be in time. These are sensational arrangements. And look, I really mean that because one of our main arrangers is Stephen Baker. Stephen's now a very successful music producer, written for film, major films, also arranged for major films. Ken McLean's another guy that's worked on it. So they really are high-end arrangements, very high-quality recordings. Means the students can play these pieces in any key and at any speed. Just move the slider, you choose what's going to work for you. And it's available on all smartphones and tablets. So that's the app part of it. One of the big resources we offer for teachers is our video library. That's where all the know-how is. So we show teachers step-by-step through our instructional videos how to do a whole range of things. Not only how to teach our pieces and to teach them from scratch, how to add extension activities, how to go beyond the page, transpose pieces, add improvisatory passages, add introductions, keyboard harmony, knowing all your chord progressions and bass lines. So this is all in our video library as well. We also have teacher guides. So the teacher guides are step-by-step. So if teachers use the teacher guides in conjunction with our video library, they will certainly get the whole package. Let's not forget the flashcards we offer. So I've got some flashcards next to me now. And the flashcards are whole musical units. We're not just talking single notes. It's whole units of music. That's what really sets us apart, actually. So we often talk about whole pattern learning. So when someone learns through Encore, you don't just learn a note or a series of notes, you learn a whole musical unit. And bear in mind, a whole musical unit, it's got a rhythmic part of it. We've got a melodic part. You'll have underlying harmony. You'll have implications for phrasing. It'll be every part that goes into making that a musical unit. So from the get-go, students are always learning and absorbing music and then internalising that. And as the years go on, they become very intuitive because they just know how music works. That, for me, is the key. So Encore is all about being on the inside of music because everything's been internalised as opposed to being on the outside and looking in. So back to those resources, we've got the student books. Now, the student books are very much designed for students. They're very clean, no clutter on them, beautiful illustrations. We went to a lot of trouble to make sure that the actual music scores in the books are of an appropriate size, depending on the age group. That's very important. Students need to look at a page and say, look, I feel comfortable with this. And also we make sure that the books last for a particular duration because there's nothing worse than wondering, will I ever get to the end of this book? Am I actually making any progress here? So we thought it was very important to set up some sort of boundaries there. So the book itself gives you an idea of progress because I think that feeling of progressing is so important for all of us. Now, you've got to feel as though that you are on a journey. You've got to enjoy the entire journey and enjoy the ride, but also know where the various points are where you're going to be rewarded because you finished a book, start a new book, and so on.
Yeah, milestones, aren't they? Important sort of checkpoints. They're milestones, aren't they? Important checkpoints that don't have to be exams, because a lot of teachers will use exams as those checkpoints, but they're once a year.
So here's an interesting story. So when I taught my own son and all the students I teach, I never say to them, stop playing a certain piece. So the presumption is keep playing all the pieces that you know. You get better by playing, not by forgetting. So anyway, my son was getting towards the end of the first book in our Encore Junior series, and he said, Dad, it's taken me so long to do my practice. I said, why is that? He said, when I started at the beginning of the book and I did this piece and the next one, he said, it's just taking me ages. And I said, okay, maybe it's time to drop off a few of those pieces. But I clearly got into his head that you just play all your pieces. Just back to one more teacher resource, we do have some music mats. Now, look, I have to say this is the brainchild of Morna and I, because you have to make things larger than life for students, and you have to find ways of learning that are apart from the instrument itself. You can't be glued to that instrument the whole time, because let's face it, it's an instrument. You know, the music has to come from you. So we have these music mats. We have keyboard mats. Now, the keyboard mats are the same size as a keyboard. What it means is that students can rehearse different finger patterns, different chord patterns. For young students, you can use coloured dots on them. So it gives them a very strong visualisation of the keyboard. It also means that you've taken the sound out, so now they're using their other senses. You know, the sounds are now in their head. I think that's very important. So they're the keyboard mats. Then to go with those, we also have treble staff mats. So we've got Velcro dots and coloured dots. So you can take notes from a treble staff mat, put them on the keyboard mat and vice versa, a bass staff mat. So, you know, I think you need a range of tools and resources, and they are just some of them.
We're very positive at Top Music about getting kids off the bench, using games that are interesting, but also obviously deepen understanding, because, I mean, you can sit there and count 1-eander, 2-eander till the cows come home, and a student may just never get it because it's actually probably the worst way in some ways to teach rhythms. Get them off the bench, get them playing a game, get them on the floor, get them using dots, whatever it is. Let's mix things up. That sounds like it's what you do.
Here are two things. Students never count. That is people that count at the teachers. Teachers are very good at counting. Here's the other thing. When I was a student, I never counted.
I probably didn't either.
And yet rhythm is the most essential DNA of music. It's the glue that holds it all together. And yet in so many contexts, it's an afterthought. Yet it should be the primary focus, and all the other layers go on top of the rhythm. I mean, just look at a band. Who holds the band together? It's the drum kit. It's the drummer and the bass player. Yet sometimes we're so focused on notes, and in particular, you know, sometimes the right hand and melodic patterns, but there's all this other music there that's supporting it.
Absolutely. I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, which was patterns. You used the phrase whole pattern learning, which I found really interesting, because we've talked before and I've interviewed Paul Myatt. We've run courses on whole body learning, and I think that is something that is very much aligned with what you do as well, i.e. getting music in the body rather than just in the eyes and the fingers. When you talk about patterns, can you explain, how did you come to realise the importance of patterns? Because I perceive patterns as words when we read a book, we're not reading letter by letter, we're reading words, and they're kind of like the patterns of music. Would you agree with that? And how did you come to this?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Well, you know, the more you listen to music, you hear all these patterns. And the music doesn't just wash over you. So you're hearing harmonic patterns when you're listening, you're hearing bass lines, you're hearing melodic patterns, and you're hearing the phrasing. And so after a while, you realise that even when you look at some of the great composers, they all had their own DNA in terms of the patterns they used. So in modern language, you'd probably use the word riff. But we used to play a game with my children, and it was called the symphony game or the music game. And they listened to a piece of music and they had to guess the composer. Didn't need to know the piece. Just by listening to the style, could you tell who that is? Because every composer is defined by that. We're all a bit like that, actually, all composers. So then you realise that, hold on, music's just all these patterns, but I always use the word whole pattern, which I think is very important. And then if you teach students that way, they realise, well, hold on, they could write their own pieces if you just glue some of these things together and you can mix and match. And then that's why our flashcards use whole patterns as opposed to just individual notes, because then even with our flashcards, the students realise that all these patterns are portable. Now, that is just so important. But back to the pattern idea, see, music has to be internalised. That's the number one thing. So the brain actually triggers what has to happen. So all music learning is, how do we get music internalised for the students? Well, if you read from a page, yes, that can work. It takes a long time because there's so much else that's missing. If you move to music, if you use body percussion, if you verbalise, if you use speech patterns, time names, all sorts of things, then you've got this multimodal way of learning. And you mentioned the word games. Games are important, but again, there has to be a clear focus. So I'm somebody who loves fun. Sometimes you can have a bit of fun for the sake of fun, but you always want to have some sort of underlying learning. Remember when we were doing Encore in Thailand, and I've always enjoyed visiting Thailand, and some of the teachers there were a bit sceptical. They said, oh, this is so much fun. How can the students be learning when they're having so much fun? They thought it had to be dull, boring, and no one's allowed to smile. Get that smile off your face right now, knuckle down. And then to their amazement, after a few months, they said, hey, this worked. You mean we can have fun and learn at the same time? So I've really enjoyed meeting so many different teachers and all the cultural differences. And that's helped shape a lot of my ideas as well. I think taking on cultural differences is so important. And then sometimes you've got to rework things to suit your culture. Again, so important. So you look at the Kodai time names. Well, Kodai didn't come up with those. He borrowed those from the French.
Are you talking about the use of ta and titi, for example?
That's right. That's exactly right.
I thought that was Kodai's invention.
No, they're the French time names, all right? And I remember when we had to do some of those at university, I thought, I'm not doing any of this. This is for babies. So unfortunately, I switched off a little bit. So back to that teacher, Una Morgan, she was using French time names. I thought, I'm not doing any of that rubbish, all right? So then Kodai came along and he said, look, this isn't rubbish. There's a fair bit of learning in this. But then he altered them. So he coined TT, but the French is tate. And there are quite a few differences. And then Mark and Morna from Encore came along and said, well, hold on. We like a bit of the Kodai stuff. We like a bit of the French time names, but that doesn't always work for our culture. So we've changed some of those names to suit modern-day children because you don't want the time names to become tongue twisters. The whole idea of the time names is to simplify it, not make it more complicated. So, and we've got a video on our website. I believe it's a free video where I explain not only the history of the time names, but how you use them. So a lot of this is about how do you actually use it and implement it. Such an important point. And of course, that's what teaching is all about.
I think you've mentioned Moira, is it? Who's Moira?
Morna.
Oh, Morna.
I'm so pleased you mispronounced Morna's name. Everybody mispronounces it. Poor old Morna. She says,
sorry, Morna.
And put an M in front of it, and it's Morna. My own children who have always loved Morna could never get her name right. She was always called Mornu. But she
sounds like a character from Lord of the Rings.
She is Morna, and Morna is just outstanding with children. And
she's your co-creator, Mark, is that right?
She's my co-creator. And when I first connected with Morna in the 1980s, she had quite a reputation because everyone said, who was this wonderful lady who's always smiling so openly and works with children so beautifully. So it's always been a pleasure to work with Morna. I think it's more than 35 years now, so it is quite extraordinary.
So I'm glad you mentioned Kodai before because I wanted to ask you about your relationship with some of these approaches because I see elements of music learning theory, Dr. Edwin Gordon. I see elements of Kodai in what you do, definitely Orff, potentially Suzuki. What was the role of those approaches in you creating what you've created?
Well, I'll rewind a little bit. So when I was in my final year, it was my honours year at university, I actually wrote a research project where I looked at all those methods that you just mentioned. I also looked at the Yamaha method because it encompasses a lot of ideas from those other methods. I'm actually a trained Yamaha teacher, and I actually trained a lot of other Yamaha teachers, and some of my senior students actually played in Yamaha concerts in the Asia Pacific region. So that was in Indonesia, Taiwan. But let's look at those methods. So if you look at Kodai, for example, it is all about singing. So we did a lot of singing in Encore. singing, I believe, is so important. We do a lot of verbalising as well. So it doesn't always have to be singing at pitch. Verbalising is very useful. So then we spoke about the time names. And as I said, we've got adaptation. So that's sort of the Kodai element. You look at ORF and it's sort of grassroots, using percussion instruments, improvisation. We've got a big part of that. So as far as we're concerned, if you're learning the piano, that doesn't mean you can't use other instruments to learn the piano. So we'll integrate blocking spiels and chime bars, a lot of untuned percussion. There are so many things you can do. And then you mentioned Suzuki. Well, Suzuki's very much on mother tongue. I think that's very important. In other words, music's a language. We learned our own language by listening, and then we started, speaking those words back, and then reading and writing came later. So that's sort of the Suzuki take. And then Suzuki's big on repetition. You only learn effectively if you do things over and over. Now, the difference with Encore is we want to make that repetition as interesting as we can. You don't always have to do it the same way. So the key for the teacher is, how can I do that in different sorts of ways? And then, of course, Encore, we've taken things so much further. So we actually use a lot of body percussion. And Morn and I have worked it out. We can almost teach any piece from start to finish just through body percussion, movement, gesture, some verbalization of lyrics. So by the time the students go home, they actually know the whole piece. They know the form, they know the phrasing. This is so important. They know the key rhythmic elements. They know some key melodic patterns. And then, of course, we also explore a whole range of styles. So, yes, we look at the classical spectrum. We've got jazz, we've got rock, we've got reggae, and the list goes on. But I often come back to phrasing and rhythm because as an examiner, I've found they're probably the two weakest things in the examination room, because I've always said everybody seems to know the notes. They can all play the notes. It's how you organise those notes musically. That's often what's missing. So we always like to start with the music first, and then we start adding all the notes. Whereas a lot of people start with the notes, then they try to add the music. But I'm sorry, the horse has bolted. It's a little bit late for that. And the other thing that Morn and I have added is technique. Look, technique is so important. Now, look, I'm an avid golfer, and when I go to the golf driving range, I sometimes help others who are half destroying their bodies and wearing themselves out because they're doing it all the wrong way. And I can only handle that for so long, and I think these poor people, they'll exhaust themselves. I better show them the right way to do this. So if you use the right technique, you'll get success much more quickly. Everything will be more stable, particularly in performance. Now, this is where our keyboard mats work well. So we can do a whole lot of modelling of technique on the keyboard mats. And I think you'll find that sometimes people who are very imaginative can overlook the technical aspect. And one of the key things is, how do you work technique into all this and make that interesting as well? And then back to technique. Technique starts with good posture. So guess what? Our students, the early pieces they play, for the most part, they play them standing up. Standing up's the best posture you can get. You're balanced. You see, if you're not physically balanced, it'll be very hard to play well. And you can look at any sport, and those people are so good at what they do because their physical balance, their sense of movement is so good. And I often find that's sometimes missing from a lot of people who learn piano.
The Associated Board and the Royal Schools of Music has released its new piano syllabuses for 2025 and 2026. For practical and performance grades from initial grade through to grade 8, students will love the wide choice of repertoire. It includes familiar favourites, core classics and new commissions, as well as chart-topping pieces from pop, stage and screen. With professional audio recordings available to stream from music platforms such as Apple Music, Amazon and Spotify, it's now easier than ever to explore and choose exam pieces. Books for all grades, each featuring 9 selected pieces, are now available from all good music retailers, and students can use the new syllabus in exams from the 1st of January 2025. Explore the inspirational new repertoire and find out more at abrsm.org.uk/piano. I really like that you're taking what I would call perhaps a macro view of a musical piece that a student's learning. So it's the big picture, it's the phrasing, it's the structure, it's the genre, it's where it comes from, it's how it looks, how it feels, the big pattern chunks. Rather than, let's just learn the first 2 bars. No, let's get the whole piece in our bodies this lesson, that which I think is great. And the other thing, I've really focused on helping teachers become more integrated, what I call integrated in their approach, i.e., let's not pigeonhole, okay, technique is here, and then we're going to move on to pieces, and then we're going to move on to sight reading, and then we'll move on to chords. No, it should all be part of a synchronous whole. And that sounds exactly like what you profess as well, or what you teach.
Tim, I think you're absolutely spot on. So I was doing some workshops in Sydney some years ago, and there were some teachers there who had come from Eastern Europe. They now live in Australia. And they liked our material a lot. And they said, but look, where's the technique? Because we don't have a separate technique book, you see. And you're right, this pigeonholing of, I need a book for this, and I need a book for that. And it's almost like the Marx Brothers with a day at the races. Unless you buy 20 books, you can't do it. And then when I explained to these teachers, listen, all the technique is embedded. And when I took them through the process, so everything is embedded in our books. And that's why the teacher guides are so important. And that's why our video library is so important. Because there's technique in just playing a single note. How do you sound that single note? How do you prepare to play that single note? And so I think it's important for students to understand and appreciate the inherent music in everything they play. It doesn't matter whether it's one note or three notes. Now, I went to an incredible performance of the Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto the other night by this outstanding blind Japanese pianist, Nobuyuki. And there's one part in the middle of the third movement where the pianist just plays a handful of chords. And he did them so sensationally well. And some of the orchestral players say that's their favourite bit. In other words, you strip everything back and how well can you voice those chords, bring out some bass notes, got the melody there. So, find the inherent music in all of these things. You don't need to sort of petition it all out.
I'm going to have to look up that little bit of rack 3, I think. Can't think of it off the top of my head. Now, I think you've got an acronym, SMART it is, which kind of sums up this approach. Could you just explain that really quickly, if that's going to help?
Yeah, look, I think it does. So, look, the acronym was important because there are so many elements to Encore. It's sometimes difficult to just, focus on a few. And we thought, how can we define Encore? And so that's when we came up with the acronym. And so we've got SMART, SMART. And so the S stands for snapshot, and you spoke about macro and big picture. So the whole snapshot was, how can we give the students a feel for this piece before they actually start playing it? So it could be for young children, it could be storytelling, could be the illustration. It could be playing an example of a similar piece to get them, in tune with that sort of sound, that sort of genre. But get them focused on what's about to take place. But also give an idea of what they're going to try and achieve. So it's something to say, we're going to climb this mountain. Doesn't mean anything until you see the picture of the mountain and say, oh my God, what a huge mountain. How are we going to do that? So that's what the snapshot is. That's the S in SMART. And then the M is for movement and modelling. So movement, we're moving to music. We've got gestures. We've got body percussion. The modelling is where we use our Encore Smart Mats, or the keyboard mats, where the students can rehearse elements before they actually play them on the piano. So important. Modelling also is where the teacher demonstrates and the student copies. That's so important. Listen back. Listen to what the teacher does. Can you play it back just like that? Listening skills are so important. So even in my advanced teaching, I'll often say to students, could you go from here? I don't point to the score. I never point to the score. I play the passage. They have to then find that passage by listening. That's a big change in how you teach, and say, go from this bit. Or I'll say, could you go from the pentatonic passage? Well, they've got to understand how the piece is structured, don't they, to find the pentatonic passage. So it's a different way of thinking. So that's M for, movement and modelling and all those other things I mentioned. Then we get to A. So A is for oral, and we include the singing in there. So the oral is the listening. We include by ear playing and singing, where the teacher will play little patterns and the students have to play them back by ear. This includes melodic and harmonic patterns, as in chord progressions. So can you hear that? Can you replicate it? And then sometimes we'll say to the students, why don't you make some up? And then the teacher will play them back.
Yeah, 100%.
That's right. So now the students have to say, they have to draw on their internal musical, memory DNA and say, I actually have a library of all these sounds. So we often refer to a library of sounds. So I think singing is important. And yes, a lot of students don't want to sing, but I think we can do it in different ways. And you can also do verbalization. So with the songs we have a lot of songs in our books. And the songs, we don't just sing songs, we move to the songs. So through the songs, the students are learning form, musical form. They're learning about phrasing. They're learning about specific rhythmic units. That's so important. And it's all done through a song. And plus they're learning about that particular genre. So we've done S, M, A, R. That's the big one, isn't it? Rhythm.
Rhythm, yep.
Rhythm and reading, because it's all about how you teach rhythm. And you mentioned, was it one and or one ander and two ander? That brings back some very difficult memories for me. We've got to stay away from that, all right? But so the thing is, the one and the one ander was sort of on the right track. It's just that I wouldn't use that particular language. So it does come back to language. So rhythm is very much linked to language, and rhythm has to flow, has to have a natural flow. And I think reading is very important, but it's all about how do you teach reading and how do you integrate it.
And when do you do it as well?
That's right. It's a key thing. So that's where we use our flashcards. So we'll say to the students, oh, look, you've just learned some of this piece. Oh, wow, they're the notes on the page that you just played. Oh, here's a flashcard that matches it. Let's match that up. Now, can we verbalise that from the card? Can we find that in the piece? And then, of course, we also do score mapping and colour coding on scores so that instead of having this plethora of notes on the score, we show the students how all the notes are grouped and how they relate to each other. And we do that through colours and score mapping. Now, that's so important. So instead of seeing all these notes on the page, the students just see this series of patterns. Or in some cases, it could be a series of colours. It could be a 3-colour piece. So for young students, the 3-colour piece is the most common. You know, you've got the answer, you've got the opening phrase, the answer, the opening phrase returns, and you've got a different answer to finish the piece off. That's if it's a, for example, an 8-part piece. So I think we've done S, M, A, R, T. Okay, T, the big one. Technique. You've got to have the tools to play. If you don't have the tools to play, I'm sorry, you're not going to feel good and you're not going to sound great. So that's very important. However, I've got a few different ideas on technique. Some people think technique is just scales and that type of thing. Technique is so much more, as I said. It starts with physical balance and posture. How far are you sitting from the instrument? And that's going to change as you get older. Are your feet supported? If you don't have your feet on Mother Earth, believe me, it's not going to happen. You watch orchestral players, particularly the string players, the violinists, when the going gets tough, they put their feet almost in a running position, like at the starting blocks, because they want to be anchored. Then this is all free to go. So all these things are important with technique. And then the other T is to do with technique and artistry. There is a T in artistry. We want the students to always sound highly musical and very artistic because, look, I teach students from age 3 right through to university level and high-end diplomas. And I believe there's a connection between the very bottom end of people starting and the very top end. And I really go to great lengths to link all those things together. And one of my better students, Eddie Kawauchi, a Japanese fellow who's now gone back to Japan. Remember when Eddie was learning the Rachmaninoff second piano concerto to perform that? And a week before I said, Eddie, how's your practice going? He said, oh, I'm doing a lot of listening. I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, I want to make sure I've got all those sounds in my head so I know exactly how I want to play that piece when the moment comes. And I thought, well, that's really important. So he's not down here doing all this, with fingers going crazy. No, he's making sure he's got it all set out in his head and in his oral capacity.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. So as we come to the end of our session today, I'm keen to know if you have more general advice for teachers. I mean, you're an examiner, you're an incredibly experienced teacher, you're a business owner, you have done workshops internationally, you have a massive wealth of experience. What advice might you give to piano teachers listening, separate to using my resources or your resources, just in their lessons with their students, that could make a really big difference in the next few months or into next year for them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, sometimes even for myself, teaching a lesson, it can feel difficult just to get out of the teacher's chair, can't it? You've got that cup of coffee next to you sometimes. It's like, I just need to sit down here quietly. But I would say maybe teachers, that's worth challenging yourself as a teacher. What can you do that's not happening on the piano? In other words, what can you teach away from that instrument? So as I mentioned before, we use our keyboard mat. So that's one way. You could close the lid, put a keyboard mat on top. Or if you don't have a keyboard mat, what could you do on top of the lid of the piano? What could you do on top of the piano stool where you just sort of kneel on the floor and do an activity there and then relate it to the piano? Or in terms of reading, what could you do outside of the piece that's there that's going to develop some skills, whether it be using flashcards that perhaps you make yourself or flashcards that we have at Encore? Or maybe you could do a song. So quite often I'll make up lyrics to pieces for students and the piece flows better. Now, I taught a student for many years who had a number of impairments, and the biggest issue was rhythm. And so for this girl who I taught for well over 20 years, she could learn a piece successfully if we put words to it, had to have lyrics. So teachers can look at different lyrics, different speech patterns. That's going to work for a piece as well. Now, if they can't think of anything, they could go to our website, for example. We've got our song up there, the Yonky Wiggle. I think it's a free view, that one. And you could teach your students the Yonky Wiggle, because in doing some of these songs, they're going to learn so much music. And then you have to find ways to relate it to what they're doing. So I think that's the takeout.
Yeah, I think I'm going to summarize that by saying get off the piano, get off the page, and get off the piano and see how you can bring music to students in other ways.
That's right. If you want to do the page better, get off the page.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right. It's so true. It seems counterintuitive for those classically trained and very traditionally taught, but so true. And I really hope this is hitting home for lots of teachers who've heard many of my episodes with teachers like Mark, who really share these incredible off-bench approaches and whole body and whole pattern approaches. They're so important.
Well, I'll tell you what I did once, Tim. So I had this student learning this, I think it was about a grade 8 piece, something like that. And I wanted her to get away from the page for some of it. So we photocopied the 2 pages the piece was. I kept her book. And with the photocopies, I cut out all the bits that she had to do without a score. So she went home with these 2 pages with all these things that were cut out. All the bars were missing. And she had to fill them in at home without having them in front of her. So again, that was another way of doing it off the page.
I like it. In a minute, I might ask you about whether you've got any offers on at the moment and where people can go to find out more. But before that, there's one thing we haven't talked about, which I only found out about recently, which was called Encore Star. So you have I might let you explain it. I think we've missed the boat for it this year, but hopefully next year.
Look, we have missed the boat for this year. It's been running for a number of years now. So Encore Star is our online international competition. So it's for any student who's learning pieces from an Encore book. And it's a terrific opportunity, particularly for beginner students, where they can play a piece, video their performance, upload it to social media. Important to put the hashtag there. So if, for example, if people went there now, if you look up the hashtag of Encore Star 2024, you could look at some of the performances that are already up there. So you mentioned before exams, that means students can have this goal of doing a terrific performance for Encore Star. And they can record their performance up to 6 months before the entries open. So entries have just opened. Now, of course, they can do multiple recordings. They can record it in, a number of lessons. They can record it at home, and then they can upload the one they think is best. But it's not just solo performance. They can do a duet with a friend, or they can do a solo duet. They can do all the parts. They can do an ensemble performance with other performers, or a solo ensemble performance where the student does all the parts. They do multiple parts. There's also an opportunity to have a student-parent performance. We've had some terrific ones in that category, particularly where the whole family were involved. Someone did a piece of ours that involved rain, and so we had umbrellas and raincoats and all sorts of things, and even the baby was involved in that piece. It just looks sensational. Like, how do you get music in the home? This is how you do it.
Involve the family.
And for this year, we've got our piano prep level is also going to be available for Encore Star. So this is our earliest course that involves piano. So we'll have students doing all sorts of things on the piano. They'll be playing with open palms on black keys. They'll be doing glissandi with a few soft toys, all sorts of things. And so Encore Star means it's international, several countries. You've got an opportunity to play with friends, by yourself, with your family. It doesn't get really much better than that. And of course, then we have judging, prize giving, the award of certificates and trophies. And one of the fun bits is we do add up all the points to see which country got the most points. It's a bit like the Olympics, how we get the medal count. So the medal count for Encore Star is quite interesting because, we have a bit of competition between Australia and Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and so on. So it's always interesting to see which country is going to come out on top each year. So the entries are open at the moment. They close soon, and then all the judging and all the fun's going to start. But it's something way outside of exams that can really motivate students, and it's great for the parents too.
Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing all of your wisdom and ideas. You better tell us where we can find out more about your resources. Where should teachers go if they like what they've heard and they want to find out more?
Well, I think the first place to go is our website. So it's encoremusiceducation.com.au. Maybe the place to start there would be go to our courses, and we've got samples of books. More importantly, we have samples of the recordings and backing tracks. Click on some of those samples, have a listen, and you hear how the music comes alive. That's important. The music really does come alive. So maybe start there. Then you could go to the teachers section on that website, and you'll find all these free downloads. So you can download manuscript in all different sizes because, for younger students, it has to be a bit bigger. You can download some introductory teaching notes, which are going to explain quite a few Encore principles. You can download sight reading. You can download some free theory worksheets. So these are all free downloads, just to give you a taste, get you started, use them in your lessons. In fact, I always go to that website to download my own manuscript when I'm writing a new piece because I'm still a pencil and rubber guy. I like to just do it by hand before I go using any digital tools for composition. And then after teachers have done that, it might be worth going to our video library. In fact, it'd be very much worthwhile going to our video library and see how this is done. I think that's very important. And so one of the offers we have for teachers, if they would like to become a licensed Encore teacher, which means they get all the books, they get all the material, they get access to our digital library to learn all the know-how, and then they're also invited to join us for our January workshops, which happen every year, join our Q&A online sessions, where you can mix with other teachers, ask any question you like. I'll give you the answer, all right? So for our license package for 500 Australian dollars, you're going to get a plethora of books. You're going to get, well over $1,000 of value. Anyone that would like to sign up for that up until the end of December this year, we'll also give you, include in that, our treble clef mat and our bass clef Encore mat, and together with all the stickers that go with that. And those mats are worth, about $45 each. So that's a special offer we've got there for teachers. Check out all the stuff on the website first, and then you'll get a real feel for what it's all about. And you can also talk to other teachers. And as I said, go to Facebook and Instagram, check out some of those Encore Star performances.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mark. Where should they go for that special offer that you just mentioned?
Well, if you go to our website, send us an email. You'll see the contact details there and say, listen, I listened to Tim's podcast. I'm interested in all of this. They have to mention you, Tim. They're going to have to say, the Tim Topham podcast. I think that's very important. And we'll say, we know where you come from. We know the wavelength you're on, because it is a way of thinking. We'll say, okay, we know where this is going. Let us help you. And look, that's a very important point, because Morn and I, we're the creators, but we have this wonderful team, and we deal with you personally, all right? You're not going to deal with a computer. You're going to send us an email, and we're going to get in direct contact with you. We can do a Zoom call with you. We can talk to you over the phone. And any problem you have, we're going to sort out, person to person. I think that's very important in the digital age, that you're going to get that personal contact.
Great. And a quick one, does your approach work with groups?
Well, people often say that. Okay, so the secret's out of the bag, Tim. The whole Encore thing was developed primarily for group tuition. All right? They're the ideas behind it. However, I would say just as many people use it in one-on-one instruction that use it in groups. So it actually works beautifully for both. And I suppose that's the key. So many people that teach one-to-one, sometimes unaware of all the group teaching techniques that would help them so much in their lessons. That's the key. So you don't have to teach groups to use group teaching concepts and ideas. So it works magnificently for groups as well as one-on-one, and we have people doing all of those things, including myself. So I remember, one group of students I taught who were well into their high school years, and I said, look, we've got to stop doing this. Let's just do one-on-one. And they said, no, we just love coming to lessons together. You're the teacher. Figure out how to make this work, all right? Make it work. That's your job.
And you've mentioned another, obviously you and I are based in Australia and your company is as well, but you've mentioned other countries. Do you post to America, UK, anywhere?
Yes, we do. Look, we do post to anywhere. Look, I've even sent materials to the Democratic Republic of Congo. All right. That was actually a very tricky one. All right. I won't go into the details of that, but I have done that. So we do have representatives in several countries, namely Indonesia, Malaysia, or our near Asian neighbours. And we have some wonderful teachers over there in the UK, to a lesser extent in the US, because we really haven't explored it very far, but we do have teachers over there using our material. So yes, we're very happy to send our material anywhere in the world. And of course, as you would know, freight's a big issue. So any way we can help with cost in terms of freight, we will certainly do everything in our means to make it easier for the teachers. So when they get in their hands, it's not going to cost them more than they expected to pay. I think that's very important.
Well, we've got a lot of teachers in the US who listen to the show, so hopefully they'll be finding out about this potentially for the first time, and they can go to encoremusiceducation.com.au to find out more. We'll put links to things that Mark has mentioned, including his bundle, etc., on our show notes page for today's episode at topmusic.co/episode 395. Mark, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Really appreciate it.
Tim, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you.
Hopefully it won't be another 10, 15 years before we reconnect. Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat today with Mark Gibson. And the great news is that Top Music Pro members, we have a new discount in our academy, and it is 10% off Encore products. So if you'd like to download or grab any of the things that we've been talking about today, then make sure you jump into the Academy first to grab your discount code. Now, if you're not already a Top Music Pro member, well, make sure you come and join us. We have discounts on so many different things, products and services, software, My Music Star, Fonts, Music Notes, Sheet Music Plus, all sorts of different things. You will save money left, right and centre if you are a Top Music Pro member. Come and join us. topmusicpro.com, and you'll be able to grab the discount for Encore Music publications as well. Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks again for joining me. It's been really fun to hang out with you again, and I look forward to chatting with you again at the same time next week. Bye-bye. How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages, both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today. If you enjoy this show and want to hear more of our work, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening today. For links and resources mentioned in this episode, visit us at topmusic.co/podcast or check out the show notes. I'm Tim Topham. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy your week ahead, and I'll catch you next time.